I reviewed footage from every game that Paul George has played in since returning from an unknown shoulder injury, trying to figure out what exactly might have happened. If you follow the NBA, you probably are aware that Paul George has had some sort of unknown shoulder injury that recently kept him out, but has left a lot of people wondering about what could be going on. As I was reviewing all the different game footage, trying to pinpoint what exactly might have happened to cause this unknown injury, I started to notice an interesting pattern with the different ways that his shoulder was taped, and so I thought it would be interesting to take another look at this to see if we could understand more about his injury based on how they were taping his shoulder during these games. That's not something that they just do randomly. There's some sort of pattern or reason behind why they put the tape in different locations. So in this video, I decided to take a deeper look at that to see if we could learn more about what might be going on. The actual injury history is pretty strange. So it supposedly happened during a game against the Denver Nuggets and initially affected his right shoulder. Reviewing footage from that game, I couldn't see anything at all to identify when it might have gotten hurt, but he claimed later on that it was basically just from contact or some sort of a bruise. So he comes back and he's got tape on his right shoulder for a few games, and then as we'll see later on, suddenly there was no tape, and then he supposedly injured his left shoulder, and since then has been applying this tape to his left shoulder. Whenever it changed to the other shoulder, he had a quote after a game talking about how he basically took another hit, and that it's essentially just a bruise that he's going to toughen it out and play through. We then heard rumors that he was dealing with a possible rotator cuff tear, which is kind of what jump-started a lot of this speculation. So my question is, can we review the different ways they were taping his shoulder to try to learn more about why they applied this tape and what it could signify about his possible injury? First off, so you know what we're talking about, let's go over some basic structures in the shoulder that can commonly be injured in athletes. Of course, we have the rotator cuff, which is made up of 4 muscles that provide stability and different movements of the shoulder, and those wrap around an insert on the upper portion of the humerus or the arm bone. Any of these muscles can be injured, but it's most commonly this one called the supraspinatus that comes down across the top of the shoulder and is responsible for lifting our arm. Next, the biceps tendon inserts up on that top ledge of the glenoid fossa in the shoulder, and so anytime someone has shoulder pain, we have to consider a problem with the biceps tendon. We also have the AC joint that sits higher up and is the joint between the acromion and the clavicle, and then our labrum that sits inside the shoulder joint itself, if you've heard of like a slap tear or a labral tear in the shoulder. Then of course you have your regular contusions, bruises, and so on to the other muscles in that area. You have your deltoid muscle coming all the way around on the outside. So other structures in that area that can get hurt, but those are the main ones that we think about most commonly in athletes. Next, let's get into the sequence of the specific taping patterns that we could see during these games. Now, I'm going to do a future video talking about what this idea of kinesio tape is, kind of the theory behind it, why we use it, what my thoughts are on it. But in general, it's applied whenever people have different musculoskeletal pathologies in the body to try to help limit pain, limit symptoms, improve range of motion, and just generally help that joint to function better. The key to remember is there are specific patterns and specific ways that they'll put the tape on in order to accomplish a specific purpose based on what they think is the underlying disease. There's not tape just randomly put on the shoulder, there's intent behind it. And so what we're trying to identify in these images is what that intent might have been. Our first picture we're gonna look at is from the March 5th game against Minnesota, and this was his first game back from the shoulder injury, and as we can see here in the photo, he has the tape on his right shoulder. Now, these two upper portions of tape are just kind of generally positioned to help provide stability to the shoulder. From doing some research, this isn't really a specific pattern for a rotator cuff tear. There's usually going to be other pieces of tape involved if it's truly taping for a cuff tear. What I think is most interesting though about this picture is this vertical piece of tape going down the front of the arm. As I said in the beginning, you can have biceps tendon injury that causes pain in the shoulder because that tendon inserts up in the shoulder. That taping on the front of the arm is done for disease of the biceps tendon. There's no other structure in there that they're trying to target with that taping, and so the fact that there's that vertical strip of tape tells me that maybe the trainers thought that there was some component of a biceps tendon issue to make them put that tape there to cause some effect on the biceps tendon. Now suddenly, of course, the next game against Portland on the 7th, that vertical piece of tape is gone. And so this is part of the nature of this kinesio taping that we'll talk about in the future video. Is there's a lot of variation in terms of what they do. But the fact that they didn't do it at this game could mean a lot of different things. It's his shooting arm, and so my guess is that he probably just didn't like a big piece of stretchy tape down the front of his shooting arm, as opposed to it being that they thought this was something completely different from the biceps tendon. And then sure enough, on the 8th against the Clippers, suddenly that piece of tape is back. And who knows the transition between what's going on one day to the next to make those trainers say, yeah, let's throw that piece of tape in the front, or let's not. It's probably some combination of George being comfortable or not comfortable wearing it, and feeling like it's maybe helping his symptoms. So the fact that they put it back on could imply that it was doing something to help relieve the discomfort. And now, hooray, on the 11th, we can see he doesn't have any tape on his shoulders at all and played pretty well. Seems like maybe everything is resolved. Not so fast. On the 13th against Brooklyn, this is when the tape shows up, now on the other shoulder. This was when he had that quote saying how he basically just hit it again and ran into something essentially and had a bruise in that shoulder. So does that fit? Does that make sense based on the way they've taped the shoulder here? These longer vertical pieces of tape going down the outside or that lateral portion of the shoulder from this image, usually that's done trying to provide some stability to the shoulder joint. Again, it's a different taping pattern than we saw on the previous one, and so they probably thought something different was going on. Again, this isn't like a dedicated rotator cuff taping pattern. It's more of a general pattern to provide some stability to that shoulder joint on that left side. Once again though, here we have that piece of tape going down the front of the arm near the biceps tendon. And then interestingly, you can see it kind of fan up into those three smaller pieces as it gets up higher in the shoulder. There's a couple of possibilities as to why they did this based on some of the theory with taping. One of the theories behind taping is that it kind of pulls the skin off of those muscle surfaces and dilates the blood vessels, dilates the lymphatic system that allows swelling and fluid to drain out. Whenever they tape for those specific purposes, they usually use thinner pieces trying to more target those lymphatic channels. So it's possible that's what they're trying to do here with kind of this three-pronged approach, is maybe trying to target more swelling in the shoulder. I'm not really 100% certain, but there's not really much structural reason for the taping to need to split off like that, so it's possible that they were worried about some swelling in the front of the shoulder. Going through the next couple of games, we basically again see that same sort of taping pattern with a little bit of variation. He still has that main piece going down the front of the biceps and then splitting up into the three smaller ones. But now on the side, we can see that it's more encompassing the deltoid muscle as opposed to just the straight up and down. What they're trying to do when they apply tape in this position is sort of wrap around the deltoid. So our deltoid, as you can see in this picture, kind of has an anterior, middle, and a posterior component. It kind of wraps around the shoulder in a similar pattern to how this tape is applied. And so they're trying to provide some support onto that deltoid muscle. Sometimes they'll use this pattern with some other pieces of tape with a rotator cuff tear, but usually not just this isolated one trying to help with a cuff tear. And this is really the same pattern that we see on the rest of his shoulder taping up until the present time. So what the heck does all this mean? I just spent a bunch of time showing you pictures of a guy with his shoulder taped in different ways. What does this mean for possibly what an injury could be? Bottom line, this rumor about a rotator cuff tear doesn't really seem to line up with what we see from these images. The taping strategies they were using were not really designed for a rotator cuff tear, and if they were, you wouldn't just tape it for like a couple of days and then get rid of it. It's possible that George just thought it was so uncomfortable and didn't like the tape that he just didn't want to wear it and got rid of it because it was affecting his shooting motion. I'd also argue if you had a rotator cuff tear in your shooting shoulder that was severe enough that you missed games, you're probably not going to be able to come back and perform at the level that he did in these subsequent games. It's not like he had some major statistics drop off or scoring drop off, and so I don't really think there's anything big and serious going on in that right shoulder. It's extremely possible that he did just basically bump it or knock it in some way that kind of strained those muscles or strained the biceps tendon, and that's why he had that specific taping pattern, especially with the biceps being involved early on. And then if it works for when you hit your right shoulder and then in following games you bump your left shoulder, it makes sense that you might try the same sort of taping on that other side. It would be really strange for a basketball player to get a rotator cuff injury on their non-dominant side. A rotator cuff injury is usually something from repetitive use of overhead activities, and he's right-handed, so he's not really doing much overhead repetitive movements with that left side. If there was a rotator cuff injury on that left side, we would be able to probably identify some moment in a game where it happened, where he had some trauma to the shoulder. It could still be possible that there's some biceps involvement on that left side because of having that tape going down the front of the shoulder that's often used for biceps. And sometimes you can basically sublux your shoulder a little bit from taking a hit that can cause a little bit of damage and irritation on that biceps tendon as it's going up near the labrum. This wouldn't have to be any big, bad, serious injury that we would obviously catch. This could have been something subtle where his shoulder just got knocked in a certain way that it caused some strain on that tendon. I can say pretty confidently from looking at these taping patterns that it's probably not an AC joint injury. There's much different taping styles they use whenever someone has an AC joint injury that are way, way, way different than this. And again, at the end of the day, it really is possible that he does just have some sort of a bruise, and wearing this tape makes him feel better, makes him feel more comfortable playing, and this really is not going to be a long-term issue at all. Sometimes athletes will develop sort of a crutch to something like their shooting sleeve, and so it's possible that he's just used to wearing the tape by now, and we might see him wearing the tape for the rest of the year because he might get into that groove of wearing it and feeling comfortable wearing it. But I don't think there's reason to have huge cause for concern unless some big new information comes out that was completely unexpected or we were unaware of. He's proven himself in these past number of games since returning from the injury that it's really not affecting his playing style, and so I don't imagine much change going forward. All right, so I hope that was interesting for you guys. You might have noticed this when you were watching him play, that, you know, one side, one shoulder's taped, and the next day the other shoulder's taped, and all the different taping patterns kind of look different. And if you were wondering what was going on and why they were different, I hope this maybe shed some light onto why players were taping their joints and what these different taping patterns might mean. Stay tuned because, of course, like I said, I'm going to do a separate video talking all about this idea of kinesio tape or medical tape and what the evidence is behind it and if it actually works and does what it claims. That's it for this video though. Thanks as always for watching, everybody, and we'll see you in the future. Bye.